Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be talking about why we left Classical Conversations after being in it for 3 to 4 years. I can't remember now. And we switched over entirely to Memoria Press. I want to start by saying that every campus is obviously different. So the experiences that we had on our campus may not be anywhere close to experiences that you're having on yours, and that is totally fine. I don't want anything that I say today to persuade you to leave a campus or a curriculum, for that matter, that you're perfectly happy with. If you're happy with what you're using, then you should keep using it. But if it's not working for your family, then it's probably time to consider something else. There were a lot of fantastic things about our community, our Classical Conversations community. I made a lot of great friends there, and my children also made a lot of great friends there. There were certain aspects of it that I really, really loved, and I feel like it did provide some wonderful opportunities for my children, especially in the areas of public speaking. I feel like my children really made fantastic strides in public speaking because of all of the opportunities that they were afforded. Now, I will say that the majority of the things that I'm talking about right now are specifically about the challenge levels, not the foundations levels. I did have children in the foundations levels, but the problems that I had and the reasons why we left were predominantly focused in the challenge levels. And that's also what I'm talking about with the public speaking. It was the challenge levels where I really felt like that was the main benefit. And it was a huge benefit. My children really did benefit from the public speaking aspect and the debate aspect in the challenge levels. Okay, so one of the reasons that we started to consider something else was the lack of classroom control that a lot of the tutors had in their classrooms. Now, I'm going to offer a caveat here. I had 5 students enrolled in Challenge at one time. One of my children was more disruptive. He is one of those kids that, likes to be heard, has a lot of things to say, has trouble staying on point. So part of this problem was one of my children. So with that being said, I actually sat in on several classrooms and was kind of shocked by the lack of control that the tutor had in the classroom. I was shocked by the level of disrespect that was shown by a lot of the students in the classroom, and how there was absolutely no discipline. Like it was just never ending. It just didn't stop. I feel like possibly, without having ever gone through any of the training myself, I feel like there is not a large enough emphasis on teaching these tutors how to have good classroom control, which I feel like is essential if you're going to be able to have conversations. Now, conversation is part of the company's name. It's Classical Conversations. When you get into the challenge levels, you're supposed to be having a lot of conversations. But when there is no classroom control and there is no respect for the tutor, it's impossible to have intelligent conversation. So that was one of, and this did not happen in every class that my children were in. I want to state that some teachers really had control, others did not, and just the lack of discipline of the students was a huge, huge problem. Another problem that I had was a very relaxed dress code. I know that for some reason, homeschoolers have this reputation for being in their pajamas all day, mom's in her pajamas all day. I've actually seen some Halloween memes going around that are very disturbing about a homeschool mom's uniform. I don't subscribe to any of that. I've always been a very formal person, and I value more formal dress. Now, of course, I'm not talking about, wearing a suit and tie. When we first started at Classical Conversations, I required all of my children, to wear, to not wear jeans and to wear a button-down shirt tucked in, because I feel like that is showing respect to the teacher or the tutor, your classmates, and what you're trying to learn. Now, I did relax that. The last year that my students were attending, I did allow them to wear jeans and a nicer shirt. It couldn't be a t-shirt, but they could wear, it didn't have to have a collar. So I did relax that a little bit. But some of the students would show up if they weren't actually pajamas, and sometimes they were, sweatpants, t-shirts. I saw one or two students show up with male students in like a muscle shirt. And now, once again, I'm circling back around to my own children. My special student tried to show up in a muscle shirt one time, and he actually was told to put more clothes on. So that's great. That's great that my kid was told to do that, but some of the other kids were not, and they just were allowed to run around however. Some of them did not have shoes on. Some of them had a bare midriff, even though it said in the dress code that you could not have a bare midriff. Some of them had inappropriate things on their shirts, even though it actually did say in the dress code that you couldn't have inappropriate things on your clothes. So that was a really frustrating experience for me personally, because I value traditional dress. I value showing respect for others through your dress. And so to go somewhere where it was obvious the students did not take it seriously at all, and that's a preference. It's not a sin issue, not saying that it is. That is a preference of mine, but it is my preference. And so it wasn't one of the main reasons that we decided to leave, but it certainly was a contributing factor. And again, this is going to be different from campus to campus. This next one was actually a really big reason. This was one of the determining reasons why we chose to leave. And that was, and again, this was not in every single class. There was I guess one of the problems is that there was no overarching accountability system. So things that certain classes could get away with, others did not. And there was not really accountability to try and keep things on the same standard. But one of the big things for our family, this was a huge thing for our family. This probably was the reason why we left, is that in some of the classes, a Christian worldview, a traditional Christian worldview, was not reinforced. So, again, part of the whole Classical Conversations model in the challenge years is to have a lot of conversations. And of course, there are going to be students that disagree, right? And that's great, because it lets the kids, work out, what they believe. But the idea is that the tutor is to be the moderator. And my understanding is that the tutor is always supposed to make sure that things are being pointed back to Christ, back to a Christian worldview. And this was not happening in all of the classes. One of my children got to the point where he didn't even want to speak up anymore and have any conversation, because there were students in his class that had a very liberal worldview that, in a lot of cases would not be considered a Christian worldview. And those students were always permitted to have the last word. And the tutor did not come back around and point things back to a Christian worldview at the end of it. So basically, these students that did not have a Christian worldview were allowed to have the last word. And I witnessed this myself in this classroom. And it was shocking because, classical conversations is expensive. It's not as expensive as Christian private school, but it's certainly not cheap, especially when you have 5 children in the upper levels. And I was shocked that I was paying money for my child to basically not even feel like speaking up anymore, and to be hearing this with no answer from the moderator or the tutor. So this was really one of the main reasons, because that's just not acceptable from our perspective for that to be allowed to happen in the classrooms. And it happened like every day, really every subject, every conversation. Okay, which brings me to my next point. The last 2 years that we were in was a constant source of frustration. Basically every evening after community day, the children would come home, they would report what had happened in their classes. I would end up getting frustrated and upset and stressed out. I would start griping to my husband, and I would end up saying, this is not why we chose to homeschool. This is not why we started homeschooling. I said that phrase so many times until I finally realized that I needed to do something about it. So when you hear yourself saying over and over again as a homeschool mom, this is not why we chose to homeschool, if you continue to do the things that you're saying was not the reason why you started, then you're really out of alignment with your choice. And it did. It took me a while to even figure this out. It probably took me a whole year before I was like, wait a minute. I'm a homeschool mom, which means my husband and I are in charge of our children's education. We're not victims here. We're not just passive in this process. Like, we actually are the ones in control of this, and we don't have to continue down this path. So it did. It took me a good year before I even realized that this was no longer a good choice for us. And we had already started the last year. I had students graduating. We had already pulled out some of our kids. We had pulled out the younger kids because we realized it was not sustainable anymore. I had pulled out my 2 younger challenge students because I didn't feel like they were mature enough to be able to sit in the classroom and hear a non-Christian worldview taught without having a teacher or a tutor answering that with the final word being a Christian worldview. I didn't feel like they had the age maturity or the spiritual maturity to be able to handle that without being influenced. And so we pulled our younger 2 out of the challenge program. We pulled all of our kids out of the elementary program. We felt like our 2 older kids were mature enough to handle it. So we let them stay in. One of them was going to be graduating. I regret leaving the younger of those 2 in. I should have pulled him out as well. So that was definitely a mistake, but we made it and we decided to see it through. Now that I've talked about why we left Classical Conversations, I want to talk about why we switched to Memoria Press. Classical Conversations and like Well-Trained Mind, those are all neoclassical. Now, there's nothing wrong with neoclassical. I just want to say that out. If that is your preference, then you should do that. But neoclassical education is still a fantastic liberal arts program. Like, you're still going to get a good education that way. But the traditional classical model was built around the ancient languages. It was built around Latin and Greek. Now, in Classical Conversations, there was Latin the whole way through, but it was not the emphasis. And the majority of the students did not treat it like an actual subject, which is fine. That's their parents' decision. So it was not by any means an emphasis of the program at all. So I have a quote here by Andrew Campbell, who wrote the Latin-Centered Curriculum, which is one of the books that I read when we were trying to decide what to do after classical conversations. And I'll read it now. And what is a traditional curriculum? A curriculum that treats the classical languages, Latin and Greek, as the organizing principles of education, one that relies on a relatively small number of accepted literary masterworks to teach excellence in speaking, writing, and acting, one that educates the whole person, spirit, emotion, and will as well as mind. Okay, so we decided that we would prefer a traditional classical education in lieu of a neoclassical education, which meant that we needed to make a change in our curriculum choice. Now, one of the possibly best benefits of having a large family is that you get to have do-overs. So I have at this point graduated 2, and I'll be graduating my 3rd this year, which means that after these 2 graduated, I did some serious self-assessment of myself as a homeschool mom based on the results of my first 2 students. Now, they both did very well. They got fantastic grades. They are very well-spoken young men who did well on SATs. One took the SAT, the other did not. He didn't need it for what he wanted to do. But I'm very proud of them, and I'm very proud of their education. With that being said, I knew that I could do better. There were areas where I should have put a lot more thought and care and time into their educations, and we would have gotten a better result. So what that means is, if I can be honest with myself and say, okay, Mom, you did well here, but there are some areas that you could do a lot better, then that means that I need to do better. Just doing well enough to get by is not good enough if I can do better than that. I have always wanted to strive for excellence in my children's education, in the way that I keep my home, in the way that we live life, because I feel like that is one of the best ways to glorify God, is to strive to be excellent and not just strive to get by. And so, if I'm being honest with myself, that means that I need to improve as a homeschool mom, as a homeschool teacher. And so I determined that that's exactly what I was going to do. I wanted to give my children the very best education that I could, and I knew that there were a lot of areas where I was falling short. So that's another reason why I chose Memoria Press. I've been receiving Memoria Press's catalog since my oldest was, maybe 4 or 5 years old, since I attended my first homeschool conference, basically. And it is a beautiful catalog. It's actually a magalog. They have articles, I think every quarter, there's a new one, with really intriguing, inspiring articles about classical education, real classical education. I should say traditional classical education. And I was always just both awed and intimidated by Memoria Press. So I always wanted to do it, but I was always intimidated because it seemed like a lot of work. And at the time, when all of my children were small, I didn't feel like I had the bandwidth to actually be able to pull it off. And honestly, I was probably right. I would not have been able to pull this off when all of my children were younger. So that's why I decided to take the leap, because I knew that Memoria Press was a rigorous and excellent curriculum, and that some of their founding principles really were excellence. All of the things that are really important to me, like a dress code that shows respect for others, that's one of the things that was most important to Cheryl Lowe. Maybe not most important. That was a very important thing for Cheryl Lowe. All of when she started her first cottage school, her first private cottage school, and the private school after that, there was a dress code for the teachers. They had, even the ladies had to wear hosiery if they were wearing a skirt, and you had to have, a nice shirt, and you had to have a jacket or a cardigan over it. Like, she wanted her teachers looking professional. And so my two oldest daughters, they take a lot of the Memoria Press online classes. There's a dress code for the teachers of the online classes. The men have to wear ties and I think a jacket too. And the ladies have to look professional. I absolutely love that. I was actually listening to a podcast, one of the Memoria Press podcasts, and the director of the online school actually said if there was a way that they could enforce student dress codes for the online academy, they would. And I absolutely loved that. I was like, I want them to have a dress code. I've actually thought about putting my homeschool students in uniforms. So anyway, all of that to say, the founding principles of Memoria Press, not just the educational, but the personal, the personal standards, they all really spoke to me. And so I just knew that if I could get over the learning curve, that this would be the right curriculum for us. Okay, so we started Memoria Press 2 years ago. This is our second year, and I am not going to lie. Last year was the hardest homeschool year of my life. It was so hard. I was in a complete fog probably for the first 6 to 8 weeks. I was so overwhelmed because I was, moving 5 students from classical conversations over to this new curriculum. All of my students were required to do so much more work at a much higher standard. Last year, my oldest 2 daughters did 2 online classes. They did Latin and they did classical studies. This year they're doing 4. There was a lot of weeping and gnashing of teeth. There was a lot of wearing sackcloth around here. The kids were all very upset that they were leaving their friends, because they made some wonderful, wonderful friends at Classical Conversations. They did not want to leave their friends. They did not want to do more work. They did not want to work harder. They did not want me to teach them more subjects. It was very, very hard. It was very stressful. But I kept at it. We spent a ton of money on curriculum, full curriculums for 5 students. That is not cheap. That's a lot of money, plus some online classes. We spent a ton of money. So I was like, no, I know that we're going to be doing this for the long haul, but we are going to finish this year, no matter what. I was not contemplating switching at all, but I kept telling myself, we are going to finish this year, no matter what it takes. We actually started the 3rd week of September. We started late because we had some travel the first 2 weeks of September. And so I felt behind at the very beginning because so many of my friends had started 4 to 6 weeks prior. So I felt like I was behind from the very beginning. It was really, really hard. It was emotionally hard. It was physically hard. I mean, I was not used to stopping homeschool at 5 o'clock and then still having to do an hour of read alouds after dinner. That was not the way I had been homeschooling. In my early years, before we started the classical conversation stuff, we actually subscribed heavily to the Robinson method, which is a lot of self-taught learning, which means that I was, making sure everybody was doing their work, but not actively involved in the teaching. I was checking work and things like that, but not actively teaching. And so this was a huge, huge learning curve for me. And I'm not a natural teacher by any means, but I was determined I'm going to get better. And I keep saying to myself, by the time George graduates high school, he's 3 now. By the time George graduates high school, I am going to be rocking this. I'm going to be so good. So I just keep telling myself that if I can get 3% better every year, by the time George has graduated, I could probably teach Memoria Press online. So I keep telling myself that, and I kept doing that. The children really throughout the whole year were sour pickles. They were not happy. What's awesome though is that this year they're coming around. My 2 daughters are taking 4 different classes. Next year they'll take 5, Lord willing. And my son, who is 12 now, will start with some online classes too. And my daughters love their classes. They have the best teachers and they just absolutely love it. They're doing really, really well. They're getting great grades. My son, who is not quite yet in online classes, is doing fantastically well in a really rigorous Latin curriculum. And, you know, it was a hard year for him. It was a steep learning curve, but he is doing so well. I just could not be happier with the way that they're doing right now. My younger children that are doing it are doing amazingly well. I'm so pleased with the way their reading is coming along and their spelling. One thing that Memoria does, which I think is wonderful, is they require cursive handwriting from 2nd grade up, like in all of the work. So last year, my 12 and my 10-year-old learned to do cursive. This year, I required that they switch completely over to cursive writing. They have beautiful penmanship now. My 2 2nd graders are learning cursive this year. My older 2nd grader has completely switched over to cursive now, and my younger 2nd grader will be switching over probably in the next 3 months. So I think that is absolutely fantastic. I'm so excited about it. They're just doing so well. I could not be happier with our choice at this point. Like it's so energizing to see the fruit of all of the hard work. And this year their attitudes are much better. Now we do still have a couple of bumpy days, like anybody will have, but by and large, they understand that this is what we're doing now, and they're doing really well. So like I said, my 2 daughters are each taking 4 classes online. They're both taking Latin, classical studies, composition, classical composition. My younger daughter has just started logic, and she'll take 2 semesters of logic this year. And my oldest daughter is taking her last semester of logic. Next year, I would like to add in literature, and I'm going to try and get at least my older daughter into the Memoria Press diploma program. They said that they might be able to make an exception for her, so I'm really hoping that they will, because she does have a very thorough transcript. So we'll see. We'll see if she gets into that. I'm not sure if my younger daughter is going to want to do the diploma program, but if I can talk her into doing that, then we will. For my 2 sons, next year, my oldest son in this group of kids, he will be doing at least Latin and classical studies next year online. I would love to get him in literature as well, but we'll see. Budget-wise, it's expensive, so we have to, do what we can with the budget. And then I'll probably wait another year before starting my 10-year-old in the online classes. But I could not say enough wonderful things about the online classes. They're so well run, and the standard is high. My daughters really love the classes. They love the teachers. The teachers are really gifted. They're able to teach really tough material in a fun way, but not fun goofy, if that makes sense. Like, they are still it's a very dignified class. It's hard to explain, but they're just fantastic teachers. I can't say enough good things about them. I love Memoria Press. I love the curriculum. I love the standards that Cheryl Lowe started everything with, and I love that the people that are still running Memoria Press now that Cheryl has passed away are continuing her legacy, and they are staying true to everything that Cheryl felt was important, because those things are important to me. And In today's homeschool climate, it's rare to find someone who values those things anymore. And I understand, because I was one of those moms too. I was one of those moms who was really just trying to keep my head above water when all of my children were younger. It was really hard. And so I understand the concept of trying to do less and still have good results. And I did that. I have 2 sons that graduated, and I'm very proud of them. They're very smart and accomplished young men. But I know that I could have done better. And so it's just encouraging to see this homeschool company who has made it their mission to strive for excellence in everything. Because that's what I always want to be doing. I always want to be improving. I always want to be doing better. And I want that for my children too. And I want my children to want that. I want my children to want excellence for themselves. So with that being said, if you are on the fence about Memoria Press and you have questions, I would be happy to answer them. You can leave a comment below. Subscribe for more videos. I would really suggest you start listening to their podcast. It's called Classical Etc. And it is so encouraging. It's the most wonderful podcast. And I listen to it in the mornings when I'm getting ready, when I'm putting on my makeup. I'm listening to like all of the back ones that they've done, because I think they only come out with a new one every 2 weeks. But it is such a fantastic podcast. I could not recommend it more. There's also a Facebook group for homeschool moms that use Memoria Press. I would recommend that to you too, so that you can start to get a sense of everything. But I will say that Facebook group, the homeschool Facebook group for Memoria Press, is the most helpful place in the world. I have had so many times where I've run into that Facebook group with a question and someone will jump right on and answer and like get me where I need to be. They have suggestions when I get stuck. It really is a fantastic resource. And the other thing is the customer service at Memoria Press is just top notch. I've had to call with Latin questions before, and they didn't just like try to answer. They actually connected me with the head of the Latin department, and he came up with a schedule for just the most helpful people. So I can't say enough wonderful things about Memoria Press. It really has changed it's changed our educational thought process. It's changed the way that we do things. It's just fantastic. So if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer those here for you, or point you in the right direction, because this is only our 2nd year. So I'm not an expert by any means. I hope to be 1 year, but that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you in the next video.